Well, I suppose it's time for me to completely dissect this abomination, right? That was a joke, by the way. Sort of. Recently, and I do mean recently, we got ourselves a new adaptation of the Scooby-Doo series franchise called Velma, which out of all the Scooby-Doo shows, this is like, what, the 14th one they've already released? And because of the franchise shipping these out like it's gonna be the hot new thing, as each adaptation got released, it only got real predictable that they were gonna release one within every short gap between them. It was apparent with Velma as well, but difference is that it was very surprising for the viewers. Basically, it got announced back on February 10th, 2021, but a year later in July, the trademark for the series was listed as abandoned, only for HBO Chief Content Officer Casey Blows to confirm the series is still being in production. The series also had some of the characters race swapped, with Mindy Kaling, the voice of Velma, saying, "The essence of Velma is not necessarily tied to her whiteness, and I identify so much as her character, and I think so many people do, so it's like, yeah, let's make her Indian in the series." What? The series was also not going to feature Scooby-Doo at all, mainly because he was too childlike, and it would be too hard to transition him into an adult show. But if I had to guess what his role would be, it would just be a dog who smokes a lot and criticizes his childish character traits from the previous shows. I mean, it's gotta be true, knowing the fact that a lot of adult shows have incorporated children's characters in them, some being funny while others just being too generic. The series was released 2 weeks ago on the 12th of this month, and it's safe to say that before its release, it wasn't exactly hyped up all that much, but many people were making the assumption that it was gonna flop hard, and I never thought it would turn out worse than people's speculations. The series stars, who else, Velma Dinkley, as she tries to solve the mystery regarding the disappearance of her mother, as well as the numerous murders of local teenage girls. Now you can clearly tell the plot like this has been done a lot in a lot of movies and TV shows, with the majority of them falling into the horror genre. Make no mistake, I'm not entirely against it if you do it right. That wasn't the case at all with Velma. You know what the funny thing is? I was expecting this to be an episodic show where every episode has its own plot, which in a way it does apply to this show, but at the same time they really wanted it to be story driven, which doesn't work at all if your main story of your series decides to go nowhere. I'm not trying to say that you can't do side plots in a main story, but at least treat them as that instead of having them take up on what the audience is most interested in. But that's where my thoughts on the stories end here. They're just so fucking boring, and they're really struggling to have identities of their own. But now it's time to address the elephant in the room, and that's the characters. Now I myself did grow up with the Scooby-Doo franchise as a young kid, but I never really considered it a hyperfixation. But despite that, I still knew about the characters' personalities. Shaggy was a coward, Fred was the leader, Daphne was always enthusiastic, and Velma was the smart one. How about we get rid of those traits and turn them into stereotypical teens? Which in a way would have made sense seeing as they're actually teenagers, but I don't see why you need to have them act exactly like they are. Don't get me wrong, it is fine to have teenage characters have some moments where they act like teenagers. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles did this perfectly, and it led to a ton of hilarious moments in the shows. But at least with those characters, they knew that it didn't define their entire personality and try to take themselves seriously. That wasn't the case at all with Velma, because now we have Fred as a man-child, Daphne as a cliched mean girl, Velma was also a bitch that didn't seem to rely on her intelligence at all. And lastly, Norville, who's just Shaggy. And out of all the characters in the series, he's definitely the most tolerable. Sure, he can be cringeworthy like the others, but at least he still remained to be a likable character at the end. Although it should be known that he is also the character that rolls into obscurity, which I don't know why it's been a common trend for my favorite characters in media to be the punching bags, especially when they didn't do anything to deserve that title, so it wasn't a surprise for Norville. Although the one thing about him is his arc with his crush on Velma, where at the end of the first episode, he admits his feelings for her. Instead of Velma taking it into appreciation, she instead takes it as a joke for her to laugh in order to stop with the hallucinations. And it all comes from how unlikable Velma as a character is. I never really cared for her in the original series, but at least there weren't any moments for her that made her unpleasant. This show unfortunately did. Like, I know everyone on Twitter complained about this, but I can't really blame them because looking at them first may come off as exaggerations, only to watch the actual show and realize it's all true. But if I'm not focusing on her bitchy nature, then she is just boring as all hell. She doesn't stand out at all when compared to the other Velma incarnations. Daphne wasn't interesting either. Again, she was portrayed as this popular mean girl. But one thing I couldn't stand was her relationship with Velma. And it's strange. You'd think since both Velma and Daphne are cunts, they would at least be like that together and the only people they would ever respect was each other, but they are just as unlikable together as they are on their own. But to make matters worse, the relationship is really struggling with consistency, because they keep flip-flopping on what their dynamic is. They'll be supportive 1 minute and then mean to each other the next, which when looked at from Velma's perspective, she is like that to everyone. But their arc is that they suddenly have feelings for each other, which has been apparent in episodes 3 and 4 after the kiss in episode 2, which many people weren't fond of because it occurred during a scene where Daphne was finding a way to get rid of the hallucinations that Velma was having, and thought a kiss might do the trick. Even when I first saw it, I wasn't fond of it either, but that was only because I didn't buy the relationship at all, especially when it was executed in the worst way possible to where it felt extremely forced. And I guarantee you that they made that scene just for an excuse to make the show appealing to watch, but it actually managed to make things way worse. What also didn't help was the joke used at the end where Norville witnesses a kiss and he takes a jab at rom-com, and it's like, what is the joke? Speaking of jokes, it's obvious enough that most of the humor are just simply meta jokes, which I have nothing against as long as you don't let it get in the way of things, but Velma tries way too hard to take dumb jabs at audiences, especially when it came to moments that you thought the show was going to take itself seriously. As for original jokes, they're just simply targeted towards other characters, which I know of because they do this so many times within each episode, so it's like the show can't seem to take a fucking break, because they think too many jokes, pop culture or not, equals funny. Just tone it down a bit, give some time for scenes to breathe in an effort to make your characters at the very least tolerable. But then again, this is also a show where not only fails to be a Scooby-Doo adaptation, but it also tries to pose off as some generic adult show that wants to steal the success for other shows by thinking it has to be so over the top. And that really just kills the passion that a lot of these other adult shows have. Now, I've done a lot of bitching about Velma and why its existence is completely pointless. But is there any positive about this piece of shit? Yes. I think aesthetically the show looks really good. Not the best visuals I've seen. In fact, the few times where it looks fucking great is during Velma's hallucinations, while everything else is just typical civilization. It would have been nice if the series expanded more with the hallucination world instead of having it appear for a few seconds anytime it's brought up, because I swear, a lot of them come right the fuck out of nowhere, which makes me think that they're just there just for the sake of forced drama. Sure, they happen because Velma's mom went missing, but why couldn't we have a scene where Velma interacts with her in the hallucination world? It would have given us a better insight on what actually happened. In the end, Velma fucking sucked hard. I never saw any reason for the show's existence at all, and that there was hardly any potential for it, which makes sense seeing as how they didn't bother hyping this shit up. Although if they did, then I argue it would be worse. I wanted to make like a 20-minute video on the comparisons between Velma and the original Scooby-Doo shows, but I haven't seen those in years, but I guarantee you that a lot of them were as unbearable as this. As a series on its own, it's shit, but as a Scooby adaptation, it's worse. I'm not going to keep up with future episodes. In fact, the only reason why I did so was to make this video, because based on what I've seen so far, it's probably not going to go anywhere, because despite it being story-driven, that's what it fails at. This is the first negative video I've made in a while. I feel like I should have done more of those within the past year, because as much as I enjoy praising shit, I also wouldn't mind ripping on them for their flaws. And that's what I'll be doing in my next video. See you all there!